Guys, welcome back to Texla. I hope you all are well. Today we're going to read Marvel Storybook Collection. So let's see what's inside this book after reading this book. So let's start. There are 5 contents in this book: The Amazing Spider-Man, The Courageous Captain America, The Mighty Thor, Wolverine, and The Mighty Avengers. Today we're going to read The Amazing Spider-Man, as boys really love Spider-Man and it's their favorite. So let's find out why it's their favorite. Peter enjoyed all his classes, but science was his favorite. He was the best student in the Midtown I had seen in my years, and his teachers were very proud of him. The only thing Peter loved more than science was his family. He lived with his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben in Queens, New York. One day, Peter went to the science hall for a demonstration. He couldn't wait to see how the scientists would control a radioactive wave. The rays were ready. Peter eagerly looked on. He was thrilled to be there in the company of such a brilliant scientist. Everyone was so fascinated that no one noticed when something unplanned occurred. A spider descended between the rays just as they were activated, and as the radioactive spider fell dying, it bit the nearest living thing, which happened to the Peter Parker. As soon as he was bitten, Peter felt weak and tired, but Peter just wanted to get out of the dark laboratory and into a fresh air. Peter felt a sudden peculiar tingling in his head. It was itching, urging, nagging feeling. The only thing he understood about it was he was meant to react to do something. So he did. Peter was sure he was dreaming. He couldn't really be climbing up a wall. Nobody couldn't do that. When he reached up the roof, he grabbed onto a chimney and crushed it. He didn't have the kind of strength. Peter felt the tingly feeling again. This time it gave him the urge to spring. And so he jumped from one tall roof to another, and when he wanted to go back to the street, the same strange feeling told him the easiest way to get there was to climb down a clothesline. Peter started at himself in amazement. How could this happen? Then Peter realized he had started feeling different right after being bitten by the spider in the lab. Somehow the experiment must have affected the dying creature, and when it bit Peter, it transferred its power to him. As he wandered home amazed and half-dazed, a sign outside an old wrestling theater caught his eye. It would be a perfect way to rest all of his newfound abilities. Peter was ready to test, as his new power was a British wrestler called Crusher Hogan. Peter was a disc so that no one could make fun of him. If his plan didn't work, he had been teased and taunted enough. When Peter challenged, the Crusher Hogan laughed. But Crusher soon found that it was very wrong to do so. Peter was paid well for his victory. A man in the crowd asked him if he had wanted to be on TV. Plus, Peter had his Aunt May and Uncle Ben at home. His uncle had been saved for a special microscope that Peter had wanted. Uncle Ben reminded him that knowledge and science were power, and Uncle Ben told Peter, with great power comes great responsibility. Peter was so excited to settle down. He used his new microscope. His chemistry set his knowledge of science to create a very special fluid. It had the strength of thickness of spider silk. Then he created a device that could spin the fluid into a web the same way a spider he called him his web shooters. Finally, he designed a sleek new costume. Now all he needed was a stage name. He arrived at one as good as any other. Spider-Man. Peter's TV appearances were a huge hit. After all, who wouldn't be amazed by Spider-Man climbing up walls and swinging from his own webs? Soon everyone wanted a piece of Spider-Man. Peter was starting to feel important, wanted, and powerful. No one would ever be able to push him around again, not when he had the powers like these. Peter got lost thinking about he had wonderful life. He daydreamed about fame and celebrity, and when a security guard called for help down the studio hall, Peter ignored him. The crook that the guard was chasing raced into a lift. The doors closed and the thief escaped. But Peter didn't care. He had great powers, and from now on, he only needed to look out for a person himself. It didn't take long for Peter to forget about the guard and the escaped criminal. In fact, by the time he got home, they were the furthest thing from his mind. He was just happy to be with people who loved him. And in his spare time, he was not studying or home with his family. Peter went out as a famous, spectacular Spider-Man. But one night on his way from a TV performance, Peter arrived to find something worrisome. Peter knew something was terribly wrong, and he was right. His Uncle Ben has been killed by a criminal. The police officers told Peter not to be worried. They had crook concern at an old waterfront warehouse. Peter ran upstairs, put on his costume, and swooped over the city to avenge his uncle. Peter was quicker and more furious than ever before. At last, Peter arrived at the warehouse. He landed on the far wall. The thief was stunned, and that's when Spider-Man sprang into action. The crook's hat flew at his head, and Peter finally took a good look at him. Peter felt a heavy weight in his chest. It couldn't be, but it was. The man who had killed his uncle was the same man he allowed to escape into the lift at the studio. If only Peter had stopped him then, if only he had not acted so selfishly. Stunned, Peter tied up the criminal in the webbing and dangled him off a street lamp for the police to find. The most Peter could do now was to prevent him from hunting anyone else. Through the haze of his grief, Peter realized something. He had not chosen these abilities, but it was obligation to use them for good. It was not about money or fame or any of other rewards his power could give him. He had finally realized that what his Uncle Ben had told him was true. With great powers come great responsibility. And that was the rule that Peter Parker left by far from that way forward. So guys, how you like this Marvel storybook collection and the story The Amazing Spider-Man? I really like this story, how Spider-Man or Peter Parker sacrifices for his uncle. That was unbelievable. So guys, this is the end of this video. If you really like this video, please give it a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to get our latest updates. Thank you.